Chapter 4 of Charles Sumner, the Scholar in Politics, by Archibald Grimké. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Period of labor begins. The great preparation has now come to a close. Out of the forest of old world ideas, society, and institutions, our hero has emerged, armed cap à pie for the labors of manhood, of life. The study of the law formed in truth but a part of this preparation. Its science, not its practice, excited his enthusiasm. He had early and instinctively turned from the technicalities and tergiversations, the gladiatorial display and contention of the legal profession. To him they were the ephemeris of the long summer tide of jurisprudence. He thirsted for the permanent, the ever-living springs and principles of his subject. Grotius and Potier, and Mansfield and Blackstone, Story and Savigny were the immortal heights to which he aspired. He had neither the taste nor the talents to emulate the Erskines or the Choates of the bar. His vast readings in the field of history and literature contributed also to his splendid outfit, so too his wide contact and association with the leading spirits of the times. All combined to teach him to know himself and the universal verities of man and society, to distinguish the enduring substance of life from its merely accidental and evanescent phases and phenomena. He had proved himself an apt disciple, had laid up in his soul the grand lessons of the Book of Truth. He found abroad what he had found at home, the same open page of this book, man everywhere, human society, human thoughts, human strivings. Beneath differences of languages, governments, manners, customs, religions, he discerned the human principle and passion which make all races kin, all men brothers. In strange and distant lands he had found the human heart with its beatitudes, friendships, heroisms, the human intellect with its never-ending movement and progress. Home he found a common destiny, wherever he met common ideas and aspirations, and these he had but to look around to behold. The young American felt himself a citizen of an immense over-nation, a world of federated human hopes and interests. To Europe he had gone himself, he had seen and conquered. He had glimpsed the promised land of international fellowship and peace, had cast out of his own mind the evil genius of war. He returned to his country, proud that he was an American, prouder that he was a man. He had come back determined to falsify the fears of friends that his long residence in Europe would wean him from the law, by taking up with zest and energy its practice where he had dropped it more than 2 years before. But good resolutions are more easily formed than performed, as he must have soon perceived in his own case. Several months slipped by after his return before he was ready to resume his place in his profession. Alas, he was full of Europe, her 1,001 charms and felicities, her antiquities, her libraries, her schools of learning, her art and literary treasures and institutions, her brilliant society and celebrated men. These filled his thoughts, and during those first months following his arrival in Boston were ever on his lips. It was clear that he was more than ever in love with Europa. If Europa is irresistible, Themis is a most exacting mistress, who tolerates no rivals near her throne. She abhors a divided mind, as nature is reputed to abhor a vacuum. Whoso would win her favors must devote himself, his whole self, body, and soul, to her service. Otherwise she frowns, and a frown of Themis no lawyer in his right mind is disposed to invite. Certainly Sumner was in no humor, much as he panted for Europa, to call down upon his head such a misfortune. And so at the close of the summer vacation he took his old seat in his office at No. 4 Court Street and waited for clients. The clients came, and with them the routine and drudgery of his profession, which he, alas, abhorred quite as strongly as Themis abhors a divided mind. "I found the bill of costs without understanding it," he once wrote a brother lawyer with evident disgust, "and I sometimes believe that it is not in my power to understand anything which concerns such matters." He had important cases entrusted to his care. The pleadings and evidence connected with them he prepared with his accustomed thoroughness and industry, and at times he deceived himself into the belief that his affections were bound up with the stern-browed divinity of the law, and that he was disappointing the predictions of those people who had felt when he went abroad that he was disabling himself for the successful practice of his profession. Ah! Was he not content? Did he not enjoy his work? Was he not, after all, going to be a success at the bar? He meant to be content. He wanted to take pleasure in his work. He hoped to reach eminence as a lawyer, but it was not for him to change his mental and moral constitution, which mental and moral constitution, not Europe, unfitted him for the practice of the law. He worked early and late at his desk, was punctual and faithful in his devotion to his legal business, tried, in fact, to substitute industry for interest, but it was plain, notwithstanding his efforts, that he was not at home in the ordinary labors of his profession. It was only a few weeks after the resumption of his place at the bar that he wrote his friend Lieber: I write you from my office, where I install myself at 9 o'clock, and sit often without quitting my chair till 2, then take the chair again at 3:30, which I hold till night. Never at any time since I have been at the bar have I been more punctual and faithful. Still, I will not disguise from you, my dear Lieber, that I feel, while I am engaged upon these things, that though I earn my daily bread, I lay up none of the bread of life. My mind, soul, heart are not improved or invigorated by the practice of my profession, by overhauling papers, old letters, and sifting accounts, in order to see if there be anything on which to plant an action. The sigh will come for a canto of Dante, a rhapsody of Homer, a play of Schiller. But I shall do my devoir. But to do his devoir by one mistress, while his heart belonged to another, was not enough. In truth, during office hours he sometimes bestowed upon literature what was alone due to the law. W. W. Story, who spent 2 years as a student of legal practice in the office of Hillard and Sumner, recounts how the latter would talk to him by the hour of the great jurists and their lives and habits of thought, telling him, he goes on, all sorts of interesting anecdotes of great barristers and judges. Hillard and he and I used to talk infinitely, not only of law, but of poetry and general literature and authors, when business would allow, nay, sometimes when it would not allow. But who can resist temptation with such tastes as we all had? The intellect and spirit of the young jurist were touched to finer issues than those which are wont to flow from the contentions of individuals over the possession of some material object or interest. His soul hungered for the heavenly manna of noble thoughts, thirsted for the sweet waters of noble living. How then could he be satisfied with the wretched food and drink which his profession offered? The practice of the law was accordingly for him always a tug and sweat, never a delight. The joy of life streamed over him and through him from other sources, from bright memories of exquisite experiences across the sea, from incomparable friendships at home with their beautiful loves, sympathies, endeavors after the best in the past, the present, and in each other. Ah, that brilliant band of American scholars and men of letters, how they haunt the pen which is writing this page! What a goodly fellowship they made, Sumner and they! They are all gone now, but have left in the firmament their trailing clouds of glory. No, not gone. The distant has become the near, for along the corridors of time we catch from Sumner glimpses of them as they were, of their fair forms, accents of their golden voices. Longfellow was at this time writing some of his happiest verses, the Psalm of Life, Voices of the Night, Excelsior. Prescott was preparing his Conquest of Mexico. Bancroft was at work on his great history of the United States. Sparks had just published his Life of Washington. Greenleaf his first volume on the law of evidence. Chet Story was struggling with poor health in his treatise on partnership. Horace Mann was beginning his revolution in our common school education, and Dr. Howe was just introducing his system for the education of the blind, and in the act of endowing Laura Bridgman's fingers with faculties of speech, of seeing and hearing. With all of these, Sumner was intimate, serving each in his labors, rejoicing with each in his successes. Sumner, after his return from Europe, was in fact one of the social lions of the city. The doors of all the best families opened to welcome him and to shower upon him distinguished attentions. He was perhaps for several years thereafter the most popular young man among the Brahma caste of Boston. If he got not the bread of life from the practice of the law, he got it surely from this bright throng of elect spirits and kindred minds. He never tired of them, nor they of him. Sometimes in his office they and he broke together this food of the soul. Sometimes he partook of it with them in their several homes. He loved all who were striving after excellence. They were his friends. They were his brothers. It was so with Washington, Alston, the artist, with Macready, the actor, Emerson, the philosopher, Phillips, the orator, reformer, Felton, the scholar, Channing, the philanthropist, and a little later with Parker, the militant preacher of righteousness. They were all his friends and brothers, giving to and receiving from him love and sympathy, as each in his own way was doing with his might that which was required of him. If he took no pleasure in the details of professional work, there never was a man who took greater delight in personal service for a friend or the public. No exertion seemed to him too much, no expenditure of time too large to make for friendship's sake, or for the sake of a benefaction or enterprise from which the people were to derive advantage, the citizenship of the country to be elevated, the humanity of the world promoted. An immense love of unselfish, unresting labor was in his heart. It was through his disinterested and persevering efforts that a subscription of $2,500 was raised for the purchase of Crawford's Orpheus for the Athenaeum. This good turn was a great and opportune service to the artist, and in another way hardly less so to the city. It was Sumner who superintended the unpacking of the marble masterpiece, and it was he who watched anxiously over it, the mending of it. It was unluckily broken in transitu, and the setting of it up so that the interest and genius of its friend might not suffer in the estimation of the public and of the critics. It was he who went to the help of Horace Mann in the erection of a new normal schoolhouse at Bridgewater by urging the legislature to make the needed appropriation for this purpose, and when the legislature granted but a half of the required sum, by raising through private subscription and on his personal note the other half. And when his friend Monckton Milnes, whom he described as a Tory who does not forget the people, and a man of fashion with sensibilities alive to virtue and merit among the simple, the poor, and the lowly, was proposing to introduce into Parliament a measure for private executions, and to enforce his recommendation by the example of the United States, to whom should he turn for information but to the young scholar, whose heart beat in unison with every good thought, every humane desire for the betterment of his kind the world over. All classes of the community interested him, had a lien upon his affections and labors. There were none above his intelligent criticism, none beneath his intelligent sympathy. He belonged to his friends, he belonged to the public, even then, as few men have ever belonged to either or to both. He took an active interest in the condition of those evildoers of society whose conduct has brought them under the displeasure of the state, and who have been committed to the various penal receptacles erected for the detention of their class. Their very helplessness appealed to him for wise and humane treatment. The humanity in him was touched by the humanity of the inhabitants of penal institutions. They were men who had indeed forfeited for a season or forever, it may be, their liberties, but not their humanity, not their claims upon our enlightened sympathies and Christian regards. And so he, with others, pondered how to eliminate the barbarous elements from prison discipline, and to introduce instead a treatment firm and just, without cruelty and vindictiveness. His interest in the subject of prison reform was warm and rational, and his labors in its behalf earnest and efficient. It was with him during this early period exactly and always, as Dr. Howe said in a letter written at this time, "I know not where you may be, or what you may be about, but I know what you are not about. You are not seeking your own pleasure, or striving to advance your own interests. You are, I warrant me, on some errand of kindness, some work for a friend or for the public. You ought to be the happiest man alive, or at least of my acquaintance, for you are the most generous and disinterested. I love you, Sumner, and am only vexed with you because you will not love yourself a little more." Men are not happy because they ought to be happy, Human happiness hath no common receipt for its creation, is the product of no regulation, combination of circumstances, but like the winds of destiny it comes we know not how, or eludes us we know not why. Sumner, in sooth, ought to have been the happiest man alive, but all the same he was not the happiest man alive, was perversely enough far from this superlative state of felicity, for he was strangely dissatisfied with himself, his progress and achievements. What had he, after all his pursuit of knowledge, accomplished? What success had rewarded the enthusiastic study of years to become a lawyer? What tangible thing had he to show for it all? What return of emolument and distinction was he receiving upon the vast capital which he had invested in his profession? Nothing, forsooth, but a few paltry dollars and grinding drudgery. Others who had begun with him, or since him, in the forensic race, without his lofty standard of what a lawyer should be, without his extraordinary legal learning, were leaving him behind in an increasing clientage and the annual money value of their profession and practice. With a lower legal standard and less legal learning, they had obtained what his endeavors had missed, success. Ah, and what a wizard is success! How, in the eyes of the world, it is able to glorify vulgarity and insignificance, cloak crime, piece out incompetency, make ignorance blissful, popularize meanness, cunning, chicanery, and all manner of low and selfish qualities and energies. And what a fiend from the pit is failure! How it is able to make virtue ridiculous, wisdom contemptible, benevolence eccentric, and genius itself folly. All these wonders can success as a money-getter, or failure as a money-getter, perform in the eyes of the children of the 19th century. For the children of the 19th century worship but one God, the almighty dollar, and look with one accord upon success as its supreme profit. And was the universal deity and its supreme prophet affecting Sumner's happiness, working within him a spirit of unrest and discontent at the progress which he was making in his profession? We think they were. He was ambitious to succeed at the bar. He too desired success, to build up a lucrative practice, to be eminent not alone for juridical learning, but for forensic eminence as well. Although not at all disposed to deify the root of all evil, he nevertheless, Yankee that he was, entertained a very proper respect for it as a good friend and better servant. He heartily desired its company and more of it, and this desire was neither unnatural nor unworthy. It was as it ought to have been, for though the almighty dollar, like fire, makes a bad master, yet it makes too an incomparable servant. A good round fee from a client excites emotions of a highly pleasurable character, gratifies two of the most constant and powerful passions of the human mind, the desire for power and the desire for wealth, which is at bottom but a variation of the same thing, the passion for power. This gratification was denied Sumner in any measure proportioned to his great abilities and acquisitions. He was too ambitious to be satisfied with any success which fell short of the first rank in the law. He aimed undoubtedly to reach the top and to stand with the leaders of the bar. He was not realizing these great expectations, had fallen short of his mark. The sting of ultimate failure in those regards, and the consequent promise of a second-rate career for him in his chosen profession, haunted him. And then, too, perhaps, mingling with these reflections, there crept into his thoughts a doubt of himself, of his powers, whether, after all, he had chosen wisely when he chose the law, whether in truth he had the tastes or the talents for its successful practice. Such thoughts assailed him where he was most vulnerable, and for a season made havoc of his happiness. Seeing how it was with him, Sumner became disposed to try the efficacy of a partial change. Like his father, he was ready to abandon a business for which he was not fitted, in favor of a position more to his taste and better adapted to his talents. This was no other than the office of official reporter to the Supreme Court at Washington. His friend, the old reporter, Mr. Peters of Philadelphia, being about to retire, Judge Story consulted Sumner in relation to the appointment, and found him willing to accept the office. The judge had thoroughly tested his pupil's reportorial ability, and had every reason to be well satisfied with it. 3 volumes of Judge Story's decisions done by Sumner had issued from the press, the 3rd volume since his return from Europe. They abundantly proved Sumner's qualifications for the higher office, and should have, in connection with the judge's endorsement, ensured him the appointment. All the same, Sumner was not appointed, but another gentleman. Notwithstanding the position was entirely unsought by him, he was even then strongly of the opinion that the office should seek the man, not the man the office. He felt keenly the failure of the court to select him. Destiny was not ready to send him to Washington, nor was it in her book to have him there in any such character. But as Destiny does not take her agents into her confidence, but sends them forth into life and its battles with sealed orders, how was the struggling young lawyer to know what was in store for him, whether weal or woe? The future seemed to him unpropitious enough. His disappointment plunged him into deep dejection of spirit. He had crossed into his 30s. The flush of youthful promise was behind him. He was approaching the summer solstice of middle life, where promise must ripen into performance, for hard by lies the autumn of waning life. If he looked around, he saw all his friends in the full tide of accomplishment. Felton was in Harvard and at the head of a classical scholarship in the United States. Longfellow was in Harvard and at the head of the poets of America. Prescott had achieved worldwide fame and the leadership of American men of letters. Howell was winning golden triumphs in philanthropy, and Phillips had risen to the front rank of the then living masters of popular eloquence. They were all up and doing something. Blossom in them had given place to rich fruit, while he was doing nothing, living a barren life. He fell into a state of great gloom, and wretchedness no longer cared to live. Giant despair had him fast enough in his villainous castle, where he has held for a season and seasons the noblest minds in all ages of this sunlit and storm-swept planet of ours. His friends rallied to his rescue with their sympathy and cheer. Cleveland, one of the 5 of clubs the reader will recall, and now under sentence of death, poor fellow, wrote him from Havana: "With you, too, dear Charlie, I sympathize and mourn over your disappointment in the hope you had of getting the place which Mr. Peters has vacated. It would have been a delightful office for you, and I had set my heart upon your obtaining it. I'm the worst person in the world to preach courage and perseverance in the time of disappointment, and yet I can see as plainly as any one the need there is of them. For you, it seems to me, this heroism is peculiarly necessary, not from anything in your real position in life which renders it so, but because you have come to take sad and gloomy views of life. With your acquirements and fine talents, and with the standing which you have achieved, the world is open before you in the brightest colors, if you will but see it so." Is all that has been said about the greatness and dignity of your profession a humbug? Is the law a mere string of dull technicalities, or is it a field worthy of the greatest minds? I mourn to see by your letter that you have forsaken society, and that your mind is saddened, because I can see as plainly as the day that there is no need of this. And Felton thus: "What right have you, dearly beloved Charlie, to a heavy heart? Of all the men I have ever known, not one ever had less real reason for despondency than you. I told you the other day at your office what there was in my heart. There must be something morbid in the views of life which you permit yourself to indulge. To me, and I must think mine a healthier state of feeling, life is a precious gift, and with all the sufferings which are a part of its condition, something to be cherished with gratitude, preserved with care, devoted to serious duty, alternating with social enjoyment and the exercise of the affections, and when the time comes, resigned with submission to the divine will. Law and literature, in the highest form of both, are you chosen, and should be your fixed pursuits. But they and all secular pursuits are insufficient, if you will, Hamlet-like, brood over the unhealthy visions of an excessive introspection, if you will keep out of the way of the possibility of the best form of human happiness." A little later, Felton remonstrated with him in respect of his disregard of the rules of health, for the state of Sumner's health was beginning to give his friends no little anxiety about this time. "You must take better care of yourself," wrote Felton. "You must not work at midnight. Arrange your hours better, divide the task among more days, and give the nights to friends and sleep. It is wrong to add to the inevitable sum of illness by heedless and needless exposures, by striding from volume to volume of Vesey in the mad boots. Remember old Chamisso, and be wise." Howe, from Rome, added his warning note. He is undisguisedly anxious concerning his best-loved friend, who, he has learned, is breaking down physically, and who, he suspects, is nevertheless drawing desperately upon his capital of health and strength. Scolded the good doctor: "You may be again working hard all day, eating without regard to time, or quality, or quantity, sitting 2/3 of the night, using up the whole stock of nervous power accumulated by one night's sleep, and anticipating that of the next by forced loans, steaming about on your long legs, and running to and from Cambridge and up and down Boston streets as if your body were as immortal as your spirit. You may be doing all this, and yet I am none the less uneasy about you. You know, or you ought to know, your constitutional predisposition, and that the continuance of your life, more than that of most men, is dependent upon your treatment of yourself. I trust that you have even now abandoned that morbid and unnatural state of mind which made you careless whether you should live or die. All this sermonizing and exhorting will do no good, I suppose. But I have done what I could, and now, if you will go on, neglect exercise, neglect sleep, study late and early, stoop over your table, work yourself to death, grieve all your friends, and break my heart. For where, dear Charlie, at any time of life shall I find a friend to love as I love you? All this warning, remonstrance, and entreaty fell upon unhearing ears. Their object came not out of his dejection of mind, plunged instead over his eyes in work, turned night into day in the excesses and madness of labor. He became a frequent contributor to the Law Reporter, undertook to edit Vesey's reports in 20 volumes. The publishers contracted with him for the completion of the edition at the fixed time, which necessitated the production of a volume every fortnight for the printer. The task was not inspiring, involved, indeed, an infinite amount of the drudgery of legal composition. But Sumner was not a man on whom an obligation to do a thing at a certain time could sit lightly. He would do what he undertook, and more too, and so with the mad boots of Chamisso he strode from tome to tome, regardless of sleep and exercise and of life itself. Some men take to drink to drown a great sorrow. Sumner took to study and work to lose his. He went on a regular tear, a furious debauch of labor at this most critical period of his development. On the long legs of his mind as of his body, he steamed from labor to labor by night and by day, indefatigable, unresting, as if his body were as immortal as his spirit. The thing could not last. He would needs suddenly break down or up, as Howe put it to him, and he did. At the completion of the 4th volume of Vesey, the crash came, which well nigh sent him to an untimely grave. For long days he hovered between life and death, nearer at times to death than to life. Almost all his friends gave him up. The doctor gave him up. All hope of his living seemed to have faded in the hearts of his family. His constitutional predisposition had come to claim him, for he appeared to be in a swift consumption, galloping, some called it. Mary, his favorite sister, and a girl of singular beauty of person and sweetness of character, was going the same way. Sumner's grief at her hopeless decline was poignant enough, but for himself he had no care, no wish to live. The restless energies of his mind gave place to extreme passivity and indifference to his fate, and perhaps this collapse of the active principle of his intellect and nervous system saved him. In this passive and quiescent state, nature took him in hand, stopped the leaks, repaired the ravaged tissues, renewed the vital function and forces of mind and body. And so it happened that she was taken and he was left. Slowly and reluctantly he crept back from the grave and into the strenuous workaday world of the living, to its service and struggles and also its triumphs. Sumner, during these early years, whatever to the contrary may be said of him during later ones, was full of what Matthew Arnold would have called sweetness and light in the relations of life. He was the soul of friendship, amiability, simplicity, and appreciation of the best in everyone with whom he was brought into association. There was then no touch of sternness and arrogance in his temper. The sleeping warrior within him, strife, had not yet awakened, and while it slept, the spirit of gentleness and love ordered all his ways, breathed through all his words, irradiated all his acts. He chided his brother George for a disposition to disparage what was not to his taste. He had a penchant for politics, statistics, and history, and was inclined to undervalue subjects of study other than these, and people, however distinguished, not given to them. I like to find good in everything, Charles wrote him, and in all men of cultivated minds and good hearts, thank God. There is a great deal of good to be found. In some it shows itself in one shape, and in some in another. Some will select your favorite themes, while others enjoy ideality and its productions manifold. Let me ask you to cultivate a habit of appreciating others and their gifts more than you do. Again he goes on, it is easier to censure than to praise. The former is a gratification of our self-esteem, while to praise seems, with minds too ambitious and ungenerous, a tacit admission of superiority. It is a bane of society wherever I have known it, and here in Boston as much as in London, a perpetual seeking for something which will disparage or make ridiculous our neighbors. I do not boast myself to be free from blame on this account, and yet I try to find what is good and beautiful in all that I see, and to judge my fellow creatures as I would have them judge me. And a couple of years later, from a sick couch, he recurred to this sin of censoriousness thus: "Pardon me if I allude to the Gallophobia which you observed in our friend Lieber. Did you not see a reflection of your Anglophobia? I think both you and he proceed on a wrong principle. Man is properly formed to love his fellow man, and not to dislike him. I've always detested the saying of Dr. Johnson that he loved a good hater. Let me rather say I love a good lover. From the kindly appreciation of the character and condition of nations and individuals, what good influence may arise. Peace and goodwill shall then prevail, and jealousies cease." The subject of peace and goodwill among nations was now attracting a great deal of attention and some of his best thought. And the more he looked at the subject and the more deeply he pondered it, the more barbarous and unnatural appeared the war spirit which dominated mankind. He himself had had experience of the universal love which was stirring in the universal human heart, and which the evil genius of war was hindering of its reign on earth. In the universal human sympathies and interests into which he was born again, he felt doubtless the foreshadowing of the time of the new birth of peoples, when all men would be brothers in all noble endeavor, and in one grand destiny, regardless of country or clime or creed or color. And he yearned to hasten this golden age of humanity, when the kindly earth shall slumber lapped in universal law. In the summer of 1844 he expressed himself on this topic to his brother George, then in Europe, in no uncertain tone. He denied the necessity for the maintenance of forts and fortifications, touching the world in general, and America in particular. Better if the vast wealth locked up in the military establishments of Europe were devoted to enterprises of a peaceful character, to the building of railways, the endowment of benevolent institutions, the depletion of poverty and wretchedness among the people. And for the Union it had been much better had it spent the public funds in supporting eleemosynary and educational establishments than in imitation of a policy which was a relic of barbarous feelings and practices. The government had just erected a fort at the mouth of Boston Harbor, which to Sumner seemed a sheer waste of the wealth expended in its construction. Far otherwise had it been with this immense sum had it been devoted to public charities and schools of learning. The principles of free trade, he concludes, now so generally favored, are antagonists to war. They teach, and when adopted cause, the mutual dependence of nation upon nation. They, in short, carry out among nations the great principle of division of labor which obtains among individuals. It was a common and earnest desire of our statesmen after the last war to render our country independent for its manufactures and fabrics of all kinds of foreign nations. Far better would it be, and more in harmony with God's providence, if we were dependent upon all nations. Then would war be impossible. As civilization advances, the state of national dependence is promoted, and even England at this moment can hardly call herself independent of the United States. Ah, it was a noble dream which the young scholar dreamt, and a glorious vision which he saw of human solidarity and commercial interdependence. Till the war drum throbbed no longer, and the battle flags were furled. In the Parliament of Man, the Federation of the World. A year later, Sumner gave utterance before the municipal authorities of Boston on the 4th of July to a plea for universal peace, which was heard throughout the English-speaking world. For more than 60 years prior to the delivery of the oration on the true grandeur of nations, the city of Boston, on the occurrence of Independence Day, had verified the prediction contained in the imaginary speech of John Adams. When we are in our graves, our children will honor it. They will celebrate it with thanksgiving, with festivity, with bonfires and illuminations. On its annual return, they will shed tears, copious, gushing tears, not of subjection and slavery, not of agony and distress, but of exultation, of gratitude, and of joy. The copious, gushing tears had ceased to flow, it is true, but in place of them a sorry substitute for them had come, the copious, gushing periods of callow young orators. Bragg was then enthroned and offered divine honors and oblations in the vapid and gaudy mouthings of Mr. Somebody's kid-gloved son, who was incapable of turning the occasion to any timely and serious discussion of public problems. It was a day given up to the reign of unreason, to the enjoyment of flash rhetoric and glittering generalities. Men got drunk with them as the toper gets tipsy off bad whiskey and unadulterated gin. It was an annual clearing-out day, a clearing out of all the musty, shop-worn, moth-eaten rubbish, remnants and accumulations of the American stock of self-conceit and national boastfulness. Sumner followed not in the beaten commonplaces of 60 years when invited to be the orator of the city July 4, 1845, but struck boldly into a wholly untrod way. Never since the institution of these annual discourses on Independence Day, it is safe to say, that Boston listened to an address of such surprising character and power as the one which fell from the lips of Charles Sumner 47 years ago. Nothing more earnest and throbbing with humane feeling had been uttered in the ears of city and country on the natal day of the nation since William Lloyd Garrison delivered the 4th of July discourse in Park Street Church 16 years before on the subject of slavery. They were both instinct with the spirit of reform, alive in every line with the radicalism of the Golden Rule and of the founder of Christianity, and it fared with them as it had fared with Jesus 1800 years before. Their auditors would have none of the radicalism of the Golden Rule, but shut themselves tightly within narrow, self-righteous, self-centered ways and inhumanities to man. It was a great theme which Sumner proposed to discuss, and it is but fact to say that he rose in his extraordinary discourse to the level of its requirements, moral and literary. He pitched high the moral key of the oration, and sustained the lofty tone without a break from exordium to peroration. In our age there can be no peace that is not honorable. There can be no war that is not dishonorable. The true honor of a nation is to be found only in deeds of justice and in the happiness of its people, all of which are inconsistent with war. In the clear eye of Christian judgment, vain are its victories, infamous are its spoils. He is the true benefactor, and alone worthy of honor, who brings comfort where before was wretchedness, who dries the tear of sorrow, who pours oil into the wounds of the unfortunate, who feeds the hungry and clothes the naked, who unlooses the fetters of the slave, who does justice, who enlightens the ignorant, who enlivens and exalts by his virtuous genius in art, in literature, and science the hours of life, who by words or actions inspires a love for God and for man. This is the Christian hero. This is the man of honor in a Christian land. He is no benefactor, nor deserving of honor, whatever may be his worldly renown, whose life is passed in acts of force, who renounces the great law of Christian brotherhood, whose vocation is blood, who triumphs in battle over his fellow men. Well may old Sir Thomas Browne exclaim, the world does not know its greatest men, for thus far it has chiefly discerned the violent brute of battle, the armed men springing up from the dragon's teeth sown by hate, and cared little for the truly good men, children of love, guiltless of their country's blood, whose steps on earth have been as noiseless as an angel's wing. In many ways with amplitudinous scholarship, with illustrations gleaned from the whole field of classical and modern literature, with facts and stories the most apposite and thrilling, marshalled from the wide page of universal history, and recited with masterly skill, with energy and splendor of diction too, did the young orator attack his theme, the beauty of peace and the barbarism of war. Thus far mankind has worshipped in military glory an idol, compared with which the colossal images of ancient Babylon or modern Hindustan are but toys. Are we in this blessed day of light, in this blessed land of freedom, are we among the idolaters? The heaven-descended injunction, know thyself, still speaks to an ignorant world from the distant letters of gold at Delphi. Know thyself. Know that the moral nature is the most noble part of man, transcending far that part which is the seat of passion, strife, war, nobler than the intellect itself. Suppose war to be decided by force, where is the glory? Suppose it to be decided by chance, where is the glory? No, true greatness consists in imitating, as near as is possible for finite man, the perfections of an infinite Creator. Above all, in cultivating those highest perfections, justice and love, justice which, like that of St. Louis, shall not swerve to the right hand or the left, love which, like that of William Penn, shall regard all mankind of kin. God is angry, says Plato, when any one censures a man like himself or praises a man of an opposite character. And the godlike man is the good man. And again, in another of those lovely dialogues, vocal with immortal truth, nothing resembles God more than that man among us who has arrived at the highest degree of justice. The true greatness of nations is in those qualities which constitute the greatness of the individual. The true grandeur of humanity is in moral elevation, sustained, enlightened, and decorated by the intellect of man. The truest tokens of this grandeur in a state are diffusion of the greatest happiness among the greatest number, and that passionless, godlike justice which controls the relation of the state to other states and to all the people who are committed to its charge. But war crushes with bloody heel all justice, all happiness, all that is godlike in man. It is, says the eloquent Robert Hall, the temporary repeal of all the principles of virtue. True, it cannot be disguised that there are passages in its dreary annals cheered by deeds of generosity and sacrifice, but the virtues which shed their charm over its horrors are all borrowed of peace. They are the emanations of the spirit of love, which is so strong in the heart of man that it survives the rudest assaults. God be praised that the Roman emperor, about to start on a distant expedition of war, encompassed by squadrons of cavalry, by golden eagles which moved in the winds, stooped from his saddle to listen to the prayer of the humble widow demanding justice for the death of her son. God be praised that Sidney on the field of battle gave with dying hand the cup of cold water to the dying soldier. That single act of self-forgetful sacrifice has consecrated the fenny field of Zutphen, far, oh, far beyond its battle. It has consecrated thy name, gallant Sidney, beyond any feat of thy sword, beyond any triumph of thy pen. But there are hands outstretched elsewhere than on fields of blood for so little as a cup of cold water. The world is full of opportunities for deeds of kindness. Let me not be told then of the virtues of war. Let not the acts of generosity and sacrifice which have triumphed on its fields be invoked in its defense. In the words of Oriental imagery, the poisonous tree, though watered by nectar, can produce only the fruit of death. The oration produced a prodigious sensation not only among the audience in Tremont Temple, where it was delivered, but in the city also. At the dinner in Faneuil Hall, which followed the exercises in the Temple, the orator was subjected to a fusillade of sharp criticism. The discourse provoked instant and wide attention in this country and in England, and aroused in the former in particular vehement approval and disapproval. The demand for it was so great as to exhaust quickly 2 large editions by the city. Many other editions were subsequently issued by several peace societies in the United States and in Great Britain. Thus it was that the oration obtained an extraordinary circulation, and the orator sudden fame. In truth, the morning after the 4th, Sumner awoke to find himself famous, to find himself in a place among the then foremost living orators of the land. He had ceased to be a mere scholar and thinker, and had become a man of action, a moral enthusiast as well. The young scholar awoke besides to find himself at the parting of his way from that of the conservative, wealthy, and educated class with which he had heretofore associated in Boston and Cambridge. He had chosen to tread not according to their lead, but in the rugged path of duty instead, and to help humanity thenceforth bear the heavy murderous cross of her wrongs and woes. End of chapter 4.